Hey, folks, James Azar here with the CyberHub podcast. It's Friday Tech Corner. Y'all know what time it is. We typically talk technology, but today I've decided because November is going to be the month where I highlight veterans and cybersecurity veterans who've transitioned from the military to civilian life, and we talk a little bit about their experience and the challenges of transitioning. And one of the big topics this October, I mean, everyone who's paying attention to National Cybersecurity Awareness Month is going like, oh, awareness. And not really. I don't want to say I could care less about awareness, but awareness is one thing, but doing is something completely different. And I want to talk a little bit about doing. When I talk a little bit about doing, I'll talk about recruiting and hiring and the need for staff and the need to really bridge that gap. I've done a few podcasts with Renee Small and Naomi Buckwalter. You guys can catch those on LinkedIn where we talk a little bit about that. But today I decided to bring a man, a legend, a hero, a lot of different things. The one, the only, Pete Strouse. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, James.
Well, it's great to have you on. I know you and I connected on LinkedIn, and I love LinkedIn because LinkedIn's like the perfect platform to connect with. It's like the only decently like social media platform that can still be used without like you go, all right, I don't think my feed's being manipulated as much, right?
For now.
For now. Everywhere else, you feel the same way. That's why one quick thing, folks. As of December, we'll be moving a lot of our content to local.com. So make sure you stay out for that, especially our Goodbye Privacy podcast and several of our other podcasts that some of you may or may not know about are going to be moving to local.com. That way we don't get censored and I don't have to go through a 6-month battle to put out a season of my podcast. So just keep an eye out for that. Pete, okay, back to you. Let's talk a little bit about recruiting. So, and InfoSec, two words that for some people are very irritating and very challenging, and people don't quite get it. So let's talk a little bit about that. Before we do that, though, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in InfoSec.
Yeah, so I've been in the security recruiting space since 2014. Back in the day, I trained with K-Force, started off in IT staffing, and then was actually recruited by the CEO of my last company, IT audit and security assessment firm, to basically build their HR and recruitment departments from scratch back in 2014. So while I was doing that, hired over 100 people, was extremely successful in doing so, and now, a few years later, I've been running InfoSec Hires for about 3.5 years now, and helping companies of all shapes and sizes find good security people. And yeah, that's my story.
Well, brilliant. So let's talk a little bit about ideal. In a perfect world, which I know we don't live in one, but in a perfect world, Pete, what's the role of a recruiter?
Well, and I think this is where maybe the industry could improve a little bit. So in an ideal world, your recruiter would be not just somebody who's throwing bodies at a wall to see what sticks, that old adage, but truly serve as a partner to you as a CISO, as a hiring manager. In an ideal world, I would say, a recruiter is there to advise on industry trends, salary bands, job descriptions, things like that. Often what I find, though, is recruiters tend to be generalists. So especially within a large organization, you'll have one person that's recruiting everybody from the accountants to the CISO. And it's hard to develop a specialty in doing that. You're working on such a wide swath of skill sets. It's hard to, really focus on a given area like InfoSec. So in an ideal world, you would have specialist recruiters who know InfoSec specifically and focus on that. And can advise, like I said, your hiring managers on what candidates are looking for, what the market looks like, what salaries are, how maybe you're able to improve your job descriptions. That's a big one, and one I certainly see a lot of talk about on LinkedIn is how can we improve those job descriptions. So in an ideal world, your recruiter would be able to help you with all of that.
We're going to talk about job descriptions at the very end of this podcast, I promise. I don't want to go down that rat hole right now because we're going to get stuck there. So I want to get through some of the pretty stuff first before we get into job descriptions. Having said that, though, as a CISO, I often hire recruiters to help me fill roles. Sometimes it's a contract to hire. Sometimes it's a direct hire. Sometimes it's just a pure contract job. I need someone for 3, 4, 5 months to do one specific task. I know I don't need someone full time. I know I don't need to onboard that person and whatnot. And I find I have a challenge working with recruiters. I have a challenge because no matter, and I'd like to think I'm pretty accurate in the way I want to describe a role for someone. I still have a hard time getting the right people, meaning not wasting my time looking at CVs that have nothing to do with the role I'm looking for. So, what can I do as a CISO to work more successfully with recruiters?
I think it's really about educating the recruitment force, whether that's internal recruiters to your organization or if you're working with an external recruiter, really helping them understand the core technical requirements that you absolutely must have for the role. Then also the intangibles, which in many cases can be even more important than the technical skill sets from my experience. One thing I think that successful recruiters do well is they spend a lot of time, especially with security candidates, on motivators, making sure that their reason for making a move is lines up well with the role that you're recruiting for. And I think that's where a lot of recruiters fall into a trap is they'll find somebody that may be a good technical match, but they're not necessarily looking for a job like the one at hand. So it's all about making that perfect match and really digging in to a candidate's motivators and what they're looking for. And I think that certainly helps.
Yeah, there's a distinct challenge I feel when we talk about recruiters and kind of CISOs, which is the culture. Why is it so hard for CISOs to get the culture across to recruiters?
Um, I think a lot of it kind of needs to take place in the beginning. So when you first talk to a recruiter in the beginning, I call it a discovery call where you're first talking to the recruiter and describing, what your group is like and things like that. I think the devil is in the details. You really want to get as specific as you can and really help the recruiter understand how to sell your group, sell your organization, because at the end of the day, that's what they're doing. Yes, we have to screen for fit, but we're also having to generate interest in the candidate. So providing a lot of specifics really helps for that. Anything that you feel that you do differently than your competitors, that's always helpful. That's one of the questions that I always ask of CISOs when I talk to them is, what would you say helps you stand out in the marketplace? Another thing would be, what do your benefits look like? Stuff like that. Every little selling point, all that ammunition that you can give the recruiter, the more you give them, the better chance that you'll have of getting the right people.
So let's talk a little bit about this challenge. And there's a challenge in most major organizations, which is to hire someone, it becomes hiring by group. You have the CISO. You may have a department manager under there who's going to be the direct manager of the recruit. You have HR. You've got the recruiter. And we forget the job candidate. And between all of that, we create what I like to call a perfect mess. The road to hell is paved with good deeds. And that, my friend, that combination is a road to hell paved with good deeds for an ideal candidate. I mean, a lot of people get frustrated in this process. What can we do to smooth it over?
I think, if I had to describe the ideal setup and when you're going to find somebody, it's important to have maybe 2 to 5 technical requirements that are absolute must-haves, and then a couple of intangibles. Anything beyond that, more specific, or once you start to get like a laundry list of requirements that you actually must have, the harder it is to find somebody that fits into that narrow little box. So I would say, really sit down with your team, figure out what are those core things that they absolutely must have on day one, the first 30, 60 days, that you cannot absolutely train for, that they have to have. Figure out what those are and make those the requirements. You can list basically as many nice to haves as you'd like to, but making a bunch of hard requirements in a long list, it makes it very, very, very hard to find the right person. So I would say, keep the must-haves to a narrow amount. really figure out, prioritize what you really need, and then train for the rest. One thing I think a lot of organizations don't do is they don't want to train people. And I know it's tough sometimes when you're running around and you have so much to do, and you're working 60, 70-hour weeks to sit down and to train somebody new. But then you're also running into issues where, if you're recruiting for a position for 6 months and you don't have it filled, that's also pretty inefficient too. So there's kind of a trade-off. Do you make a few concessions on the front end and hire somebody that's maybe not a 10 out of 10 perfect technical match and then just train the rest? Or, do you spend 6-9 months trying to find that perfect fit? My preference is always for the former.
So you bring up a really good point, talking about, building the right must-haves and the intangibles and the technical skills and all that. What's one of the challenges that I find in this whole idea between HR, recruiters, CISOs, department heads, and the job candidate is what ends up happening to a proper job description. And we're going to get to the job description here in just a little bit, and we're going to spend some time talking about that. But oftentimes, HR, I found it, are adding stuff in there that I don't want. Like, I could care less about a college degree. Could care less. Don't care for it. You got it, don't have it, I don't really care. College tells me nothing about a person.
Yeah, I think it's mainly an issue in larger organizations where it's a organization-wide requirement to have a degree, for instance. I think where a lot of organizations fail in recruiting people is that they treat InfoSec candidates just like any other candidate that they need to hire. It's a completely different animal, hiring security people over even IT. It's just it's a different world. It's a different way of hiring. It's a different process even. You really have to spend time selling candidates on the opportunity in security where you might not need to do that in IT or administrative type of roles. So anything that you can do really to bypass those administrative sort of requirements, and I know in large organizations that's very hard to do, but trying to find those exceptions and make a business case for security hiring being different than other hiring that your organization might be doing.
Yeah, again, great point. I think the challenge remains for a lot of people is InfoSec candidates are not like your typical, and I think that's why for November I'm highlighting veterans. Oftentimes, veterans finish their service. They may or may not have a college degree, but they have years of keyboard experience. They have years of critical thinking experience that you can't earn in any college degree. And I don't care what people say. There's no equivalent to being in Cyber Command or NSA or CIA or FBI. None of that exists. There's no university that can teach you that kind of experience. And so I often find that struggle. Luckily, in my current role, I don't have that issue. But in previous roles, I can tell you things would get lost. Like weeks and months would get wasted over a bachelor degree requirement on a job description.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, veterans are some of the best employees you could possibly have. In fact, back when I was with my previous company, we hired a guy through the campus recruiting program. He was about 30 at the time. He ended up being like the best possible recruit we could have ever wanted. He's super hardworking, disciplined, worked long hours, very motivated, very structured, organized. So yeah, flexibility on things like degree and considering people from non-traditional backgrounds. Maybe they don't have a corporate or commercial background and they're coming from the government space. That's certainly a good way to attract a broader range of people that may be a fit than traditionally what you've considered that might be a one-to-one match for that perfect 10 out of 10 candidate.
So I want to take us into a debate. And I want to take us into the debate that I get a lot of feedback on LinkedIn and in a lot of different podcasts I do and all kinds of stuff where job applicants often complain about recruiters.
You don't say.
Sorry, Pete. You're in the hot seat. You're getting the questions that these guys bring to me. You signed up for this. No one put a gun to your head and made you come on the show. So, with that being said, this isn't about ghosting. It's about, I get this all the time in LinkedIn, by the way. I get recruiters that'll send me like a message like, "Hey, this company's got a perfect role just for you," and I go, "Okay, what's the role?" And then I get director of infosec, and I'm like, "I'm a CISO. Like, I'm not going down a director level,
Hmm.
right?" So there's that, and the second thing is, um, what should let me ask you this. So what should candidates be asking a recruiter when they're approached for a role?
I think a good one.
Beyond So let me stop this. Beyond the role specifications, meaning like what's the job, what's the company, how much does it pay? Those are typical questions that recruits ask of. But what should you ask the recruiter even before you go down that road to vet that recruiter and know that you can work with them successfully?
I would say, well, I guess to focus on the role or the company, one thing that you can ask that most people don't is, uh, who does this role report to? So if it's a director and it reports to the CISO, then that gives you a better idea of what level the position is actually at. But I think in vetting a recruiter and knowing how experienced they are, or how well acquainted they are with InfoSec, ask them about that specific subdiscipline that you're in, and ask them to explain how many roles they've worked on in that space. So say, I was contacted about an IT auditor job. I would ask them, how many IT auditors do you usually hire in a given year? Um, what would you say are the core technical skill sets that are needed for this one? Are there any certification requirements? And oftentimes that certification requirement question will be pretty telling. If it's a 2 year type of job, junior type of position, they say that you need a CISSP, and they don't mention anything about,
Yeah,
well, I know that's kind of an unrealistic requirement, but it's what corporate has given me. That's a good sign. But if they just list the requirement without any further explanation, that might be a red flag.
so let's just all agree that CISSP is not an entry level cert.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, LinkedIn has been a buzz with talk about that. It's just, I
How
think
do
that's
you, as
one
a
of those
recruiter,
things.
get that expectation to your client when they tell you, "Hey, we want a junior person and they're required to have a CISSP"?
Well, I never see that personally, because I'm working with clients that don't ask for those types of things. But in working with an experienced recruiter in the field, they'll be able to push back on you a little bit and say, that's really not realistic, and here's why. So it's just as important the why, I think, as the what, in a lot of cases in working with recruiters.
So let's talk a little bit more about this whole idea of employees and recruiters. Recruiters, obviously, sometimes in the CISO community, I can tell you, they have a similar name to snake oil salesman, right? Very, very like similar reputation, like a very similar viewpoint. Like, I love it, like, because I see it coming, by the way, and I'm always hoping to be not disappointed, and it always happens. And I'll share a personal story. So I get a request on LinkedIn from someone, and in their title, they'll say information security hero, and I'm like, okay, here's a sales guy, um, and I go, do I approve or deny? Do I approve or deny? And I try to approve almost everyone. The only people I don't approve is people from nations where I don't want to have any connections to, and stuff like that. Like if someone from China reaches out, they're never getting approved. If someone's from Russia or Ukraine, I avoid them like the plague if I don't know them, and so forth. And so I gladly accept the connection, and then 10 minutes later, I get the mile-long Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that I am the greatest cyber person on the planet and I can solve all your problems. And I get the same from recruiters. Literally similar. Like I'll get a recruiter who will ask me to, come on to connect, and a minute later I get a message and they go like, "I've got the perfect role for you," and whatnot. And when I ask for more information, I always get the same disappointing aspect. How do we change that behavior?
I think it's about incentivizing the folks that don't operate that way. Um, so there's, well, I guess, then systemically there's an issue with though that behavior isn't ideal, it actually gets results. So that's why people do it. At the end of the day, salespeople wouldn't be successful unless they were operating on a volume driven model. Same thing with recruiters. It's a numbers game. I always tell my recruiters, you really have to get in front of as many people as you can. Now, I'm a big proponent of quality over quantity in general, but at the end of the day, the more people that you can contact, the better your chances are of making a placement. So um, I would say, as a hiring manager, as somebody who works with security vendors, um, give credence to the folks that do it right. Pay attention to what they're saying, and extol the virtues of the right sort of outreach. I hear a lot of folks complaining about how they're approached by recruiters or how they're approached by security salespeople, and it always rings sort of hollow, I guess, to me, because I always see it as, okay, well, then what can they do to improve? We can't stop selling. That's our job. We have to get in front of people. Just tell us how you'd prefer to be approached. And for the folks that do make a genuine effort and do their research and reach out to you with a customized approach, things like that, hear them out. I know that's hard to do when you're so busy again and working those crazy hours, but even just a quick note, hey, this isn't right for me right now, but I like your approach. Keep doing what you're doing. Little stuff like that goes a long way. Audio cut out.
I know why my audio cut out. I was on mute. So that's fun. So I will say this: I try as much as possible to reward good behavior. And what I mean by try as much as possible, meaning there's a limited amount of time a day, and I can't often give everyone the same amount of time. It's impossible. I've
Sure.
created a Calendly link that gives people 15 minutes, and I try to hold them true to that 15-minute, kind of like introduction meeting and whatnot. Um, but at the end of the day, it's extremely difficult to give everyone time because then I wouldn't do my job,
Sure.
right? Um, but let's talk a little bit about job description. I kind of want to dig into that here real quick. The challenge of job description, and I started saying that earlier, when we talked about the intersection of HR and the recruiter and the CISO and the job candidate, that job description, which I can write, which can maybe have, you know, 7 bullets for, what the job really requires, and maybe 4 or 5 bullets of what my requirements are of a candidate. By the time it clears HR, it's got 10 and 10. And then by the time it clears the recruiter, it's got 14 and 12. So how do we break down this job description challenge within the hiring process?
Well, I guess I think first off, it's important to put a control in place where you're reviewing job descriptions after they've been assembled by all those different parties, before the recruiters start using that to go find people. Because if you end up with something that has 10 or 14 extra requirements on top of what you had listed, inevitably you're going to get a bunch of people that aren't qualified. So, it may take a little bit more work up front, time up front to review those things and make sure that they're on target and that person might actually exist. But in the end, it's going to save you hours and hours and hours of time. Again, specifics are key, making sure that you're educating the recruiters exactly what you need, and getting very specific with that, helping them understand the terminology. I mean, that's something I see often, is that, especially recruiters that are generalists, they simply don't understand security terminology because they haven't worked on enough security roles. So really helping them understand, okay, what is DFIR? What is IT audit? What other keywords might you be looking for beyond what's just listed in the job description? Going a little bit deeper helps.
Yeah, I mean, but that's not always the case, right? You don't always get recruiters that specialize in infosec. Large organizations often work with large recruiting firms, right? Where they're kind of like nationwide, and they've got a team of generalists, and those teams of generalists are used to working with your HR people because they also hire operations and finance and marketing and sales and DevOps and all these other engineers and architects and designers and all these other roles. And so you end up in a place where a job description, I like to call it, gets a signature. right? And that's what I literally call it, because I can create a job description, and then HR and recruiters will add a signature to it, and that signature could be a college requirement, it could be a cert requirement. Like I very rarely, when I'm hiring for junior levels, put in high end certs. So I'll put like a certified ethical hacker or a security plus. I don't use all the different certs that are out there. I try to keep it very general, because a lot of times these generalists in infosec have a lot more cross knowledge than the 3 or 4 letters behind their name offers. And so how do you kind of break down, and how do you as a recruiter kind of look at this? Because while in an ideal world, as we started talking, you'd have a discovery call and you'd have all the process, but that doesn't, discovery calls always happen, but then the follow-ups thereafter is typically done by email. Things get lost in translation by email. How do you solve some of these challenges, and what's some of your best practices?
I think really constant communication is key. Correcting course quickly if something starts to go wrong. So, one thing that I'll see often is I'll submit a candidate and I'll just not hear anything at all, and I assume it's just because the hiring manager is not interested in the candidate, but I have no idea why. Again, the why is super important. So even if it's, again, just a few quick words to say, not the right background, need this instead of this. That takes you a few seconds to type, and it's something that can quickly help the recruiter narrow down or correct course where maybe they veered off a little bit through something lost in translation or something. So I'm just a big proponent of constant communication in general. I tend to over communicate personally, just making sure that hiring managers know exactly the way that I'm approaching a search at all times, even if it wasn't asked for. So almost managing up a little bit, thinking about things that they might need to be more successful at finding you the right person. If maybe, you hadn't discussed it before, or if anything has changed, that's super important. If your requirements have changed, if the team has changed a little bit, just that constant communication, even if it just takes a couple of seconds to send a quick email, that's definitely going to help. Once a recruiter starts going down a certain path, they may send out 100 LinkedIn messages or something before they'll hear anything from the hiring manager about them being on the wrong path. So constant communication, I guess, is the main one.
So that's a really great point. Constant communication. I feel like a lot of times, and I'm going to advocate the CISO position here, we're so busy, right? We're so swamped, and we're getting hundreds. I mean, if it wasn't for spam filters, I probably would never leave my inbox, because purely I get so much email every single day. So much email. And so it's very hard sometimes to send an email or review a candidate thoroughly, right? A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this myself, what I'll end up doing is I'll get a CV, I'll call up the candidate, and I'll spend 15-20 minutes talking to them, and I'll be like, well, that was a disaster, right? And when I finish that conversation, I reach, I'll send a recruiter and be like, wasn't the right person, or I'll go internally to our HR and just tell HR, like, hey, I've spoken to the 3 candidates we've gotten so far, they're all crap. And I'll communicate something to HR, because HR may be down the office from me. They could be, on a Slack channel that it's easy for me to communicate with them, where sometimes with an external recruiter, I'm unable to do that. And so do you often have to go through HR, and does that, we all know that things get lost in translation when they're getting passed on, but how often does that happen? And then how does that affect your role when you're trying to recruit people?
It happens quite often, especially larger organizations. Hiring managers are so busy, they want to have somebody else spearhead the communication, serve as primary point of contact for that external recruiter contact. So yeah, I mean, oftentimes we'll work with HR managers, or maybe lead recruiters, recruiting managers, stuff like that. And certainly things do get lost in translation. that's why, my preference is always to work directly with the hiring manager, because that way nothing does get lost in translation. Obviously, I understand that's not always possible, but again, it comes back to saving your time. Spending a little bit of time on the front end is going to save you way more time on the back end. And I know sometimes you're so operationally saturated, it's hard to see it that way, and it's just hard to respond to all requests and inquiries. But potentially spending 30 seconds educating either the HR manager or the external recruiter, if you can work with them directly, that's again always best case scenario, I think. But it may save you an hour a week just in reviewing resumes and profiles and talking to, could be multiple hours a week, if you're talking to multiple candidates in a given week that aren't fits. So just spending that few minutes up front. But yeah, I mean, working through HR, it's possible. We've made placements that way, but it's always more challenging. I like to ask questions like, what's the hiring manager's recruiting style or management style? How do they view their team? Stuff like that. And oftentimes you don't necessarily get a clear picture from the HR person of what the hiring manager is actually like. They may try to tiptoe around something, or they may give you a canned answer, and it's little details like that that can make it so much more difficult to find good people, because they want to know all those specifics. And if I'm not able to share those with somebody, then I'm kind of kneecapped in trying to find somebody.
So, great point there. HR is problematic sometimes. I'm not a fan of HR. In fact, a funny, interesting story is when I had my own company, before I sold it, I never had HR. Never had HR. Hiring was done through an outside recruiting firm that we worked with that had direct contact with the managers, and all issues went through legal. I had 3 lawyers on payroll. Why do I need HR? Every department head got the HR budget for their own team so they can plan activities, training, developments, and so forth. And I never needed someone to spearhead it all. I found that to be a very, very, very effective way of running the organization. We had a 7% attrition rate, meaning every year we'd lose 7% of our people. Like, that's unheard of. Those are numbers that don't exist.
Oh yeah.
Simply because we eliminated intermediaries. And to me, HR is like the ultimate intermediary sometimes in a hiring process, and especially in a manager. I'm not saying we don't need HR, but I'm saying like you can fill those roles through better hierarchy and so forth, and with good department managers. Like, to me, hiring a good department manager, a good leader, was really, those were the roles where I spent a lot of time vetting the people. All the lower end positions, I let the department manager. You hire someone with management so that you don't have to manage them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And a lot of times we see that to be the complete opposite, and people go, well, I don't have enough time. And I'm like, well, you should make time.
Or delegate, like you said, yeah, hire a manager, hire a director that, they've had experience recruiting and interviewing people. That's sometimes oddly a very specific requirement from the clients that we work with, is we need somebody who's recruited and onboarded people, who's been a part of the hiring process. Not every person, even with a manager title, is necessarily involved in that. They may have their senior level technical folks doing most of that, or they may have HR doing all of that. So yeah, I think delegating is super important. It becomes easier when you hire the right people up front. So kind of almost a top-down approach, where if you hire the folks right underneath you and they have the right skills, it becomes easier to delegate everything else down the chain.
It absolutely does. And I think that's one of those where when I talk to my CISO peers, I always go like, why do you not have some of these challenges? And I go, well, HR is really not involved in my department. I keep him at bay. I'm like, stay away, stay far, and if we need you, we'll call you. The reason for it is because every team and every department head has a crew and their crew has a specific set of energies, and they have a management style, and they have a either a family feel or a company feel or a platoon feel. You know what I mean? Like, they're just different teams, and they know what to do best, right? If I told the department head, hey, here's $5,000, do something for, use this to really do, a team builder with your department, and let me know when it is, and I'll show up. I find that those tend to bring much better results than something that HR does company-wide. Because I see my team when HR does something company-wide. They're bored out of their minds. They're like, this is so cheesy. But when they do something as a team, if they go to Topgolf, or they go bowling, or they go hunting, or they go fishing, or, they go throwing axes, or whatever the case may be, and they go and they spend 2-3 hours outside of the office, I see a completely different set of energy. And I also see the performance and everything thereafter. They're just way more motivated than when HR does stuff. And I've actually taken that to the board several times, letting him know, like, why do we stay away from HR? And I've showed, like, here's a HR team builder that everyone was required to attend. Here's our performance in the 2 weeks after. Here's one team, that same team that attended that event, they did their own little thing as a group, came back, and here's their performance thereafter. Here's their productivity levels. Here's, the stuff that they were doing. And it's night and day. And I don't know, I mean, I think outside the box, to me, I find HR to be, needed but useless when it comes to most of the stuff. I feel like direct management heads with open door communication with the upper managers tends to deliver more for the staff than anything else.
Yeah, I think there's certainly something to be said for different functional units kind of governing themselves and operating as their own little mini culture or microcosm. That's not necessarily representative of the overall organization. I'll tell you that in my ideal client is one that I ask them questions about their company, about their group, and how they would describe their group if they do any sort of team building events, what their benefits are like and things like that. When I hear a client say, yeah, we do paintball tournaments every quarter, or we do a quarterly dinner. I just brought on a new client that does dinners. He cooks Wagyu beef for his employees every quarter. Little things like that, those little stories, those are so powerful in finding the right people. So again, it comes down to details, really making sure the recruiter understands what sets your group apart, maybe even within the overall organization, what sets you apart from a competitor standpoint, what sets you apart from maybe a technology stack perspective. People want to know all those little details, and it's really the details that sell people and that attract people to specific positions in my experience. So when I'm spending so much time on motivators with candidates, I dig into what exactly is it that you're looking in your next position. They might say, oh, well, I'm looking for more interesting work. I'm like, okay, well, what does that look like? Or I'm just not a fan of my boss. I'm looking for a tighter knit culture, that sort of thing. And all of those questions, those probing questions, are super telling. And when you're able to ask a candidate those questions and they tell you what they're looking for, if you have a good answer for that, a good little detail or an anecdote, something like that, that you're able to match up with that motivator for them, it's super powerful in getting them interested all the way through the interview process towards the very end.
Yeah, I think one tip I'll share is when I ran my company, and even now as I run InfoSec departments, I run them like our Constitution. 3 branches of power: the presidency, Congress, Senate, the judiciary, the legislative branch, and so forth. And it's funny, I have it on a PowerPoint because I gave a talk about it at an HR conference, and I found it to be very fascinating because people looked at me and they said, why? And I go, well, people in Texas are different from people in California, and people from New York, and people from Florida, and people from Georgia, and people from Pennsylvania. Like, every state is different. Hell, SoCal and NorCal are like 2 different states. San Diego is like its own freaking country. So I always try to argue that point in the fact that, you know, generalized, I try to push teams in my staff and people who work with me to think not only outside the box, but also feel comfortable enough. And I learned this in my time in Israel. So I remember when I moved to Israel in 2009, you know, coming out of the US military, I'm used to orders and structure of command. And I was invited on base to a meeting of an Israeli unit, and their lieutenant comes up and is doing the briefing. And while he's doing the briefing, is constantly interrupted by sergeants and even, you know, like privates. And I'm like, what's going on here? Where's the discipline? And part of something that in Israel they do, and I talked about this on a podcast with Chris Roberts. In Israel, there's a mentality of constant debate, no matter rank. Debate. And so I actually enacted that, and I enact it today within my team. So once a week, we get together for an hour, and now thanks to COVID, we do it on Zoom, and we do debates. And the debate is around strategy, around overall security posture, around some of the challenges we're having with either patch management, vulnerability management, threat intel, all these different things, so that we can have a debate. And we hear everyone. Everyone's entitled to speak. And no one's out of rank. Like, just because you're a SOC analyst doesn't mean you can't recommend something on our cloud security architecture. We want to hear from everyone, right? And over the last several months, I've actually brought in our MSSPs to these hours. And I have to say, it's been unbelievable what it has done to the team from an energy perspective, from a thinking perspective, from a performance perspective. And I haven't needed a recruiter to recruit during this time, because I'm getting friends of people reaching out to me going like, hey, you know, my buddy Daryl works on your team and I'm looking for a job. This is what I do. Keep me in mind. I really want to work for you. And I think that's one thing that CISOs need to do better with recruiters, is communicate this culture. It's let you know, like, hey, this is my culture. This is what I do this is how I run my organization. And I don't care about technical skills, right? Because I can teach technical skills, right? You can tell someone, hey, we'd love to have you on board. Go get the cert and come on in. And some people will go do it and others won't. And that's just attitude and culture is everything for a successful security program. And I think oftentimes my challenge with recruiters is they don't get that. Like everything I've just explained to you, I do on a discovery call.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think if in general the industry went towards that more, it would be helpful. In general, I'm a big proponent of, like I said, continuous feedback, but also, pushing back when something doesn't make sense, or, having open lines of communication where you feel like you can speak up, especially like you said, if you're a SOC analyst or something lower level and you have a great idea, you don't need to feel like you can't bring that up because of the hierarchy or something like that. And people want to work in those types of organizations. Building that employer brand, that culture is so important. You don't have to pay a recruiter like me to go find you people if they're coming to you already, because word on the street is, your organization is awesome, or your team specifically is awesome to work for. So that certainly goes a long way. And I talked to a lot of folks, especially in more junior or entry level positions, where that's one of the common complaints I hear is, I don't feel like my voice is heard. There's too much red tape. I can't get anything done. Nobody takes me seriously. I'm just kind of told to stay in my place and,
stay in your lane
my
and
place.
drive.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know. I disagree with that so much, Pete. Like, never let people stay in your lane. And I think people who are working in an organization where everyone is in a lane, those are the organizations you typically see challenges and high turnover, because people don't feel valued, right? And I attribute my 7% attrition um, to the fact that um, you train people so well and they reach a point where you don't have anywhere to push them in your organizations and they start looking elsewhere to go and excel, right? Like if you look at sports, right, all the great head coaches of the 90s and 2000s were all Bill Walsh people, right? They all came out of the Bill Walsh 49er program. And now in 2010 and now this decade, they all come out of the Bill Belichick New England Patriots program, right? You train people, you empower the people who work for you to reach a point where they have to leave you because they're not going to replace you, but they're ready to move forward.
Yeah, I mean that's a fundamentally different mindset, and it's one that's kind of hard to accept if you think about it. If you're training people so well, or if you're developing them so well as a professional that they're ultimately going to go leave you at some point, it's hard to accept that. But
Why?
the simple fact of the matter is it happens, and you'd
Why?
rather
Why is
them
it hard
spend
to
4 or 5
accept it?
years with you.
Pete, why is it hard to accept it?
I think in working with a lot of hiring managers, the thought is often, we're great. Why would people ever want to leave us? Why don't they want to come work for us? It's something I've thought a lot about. There's almost an arrogance where our team is great, our company is great. Why doesn't everyone want to come work for us? So it goes down to really making sure that culture is good. I think once an organization gets large enough, it reaches critical mass, and there's a psychologist that I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos on, and he was saying how basically, once you get large enough, there's so much red tape, no matter what type of organization you started with when you
Right.
were small. Eventually, once you get large enough, you have to have, functions like HR and all the different administrative, hoops and things that you need to jump through, and your culture always suffers as a result. It's just going to happen. That's why it's
Well, that
important
that
to have
that
these smaller teams that
well
you can kind of
that's
develop.
risk and compliance, right? You reach a critical mass where your board says, "Hey, we got to have HR." I mean, that's what happened to me, right? We were getting ready to sell the company, and the people who wanted to buy the company were like, "Well, you guys need to have HR in place," and I'm like, "No, we don't." And you're buying the company. You break your head on HR. I'm not hiring HR. I hate HR. I really do. I despise HR. I'll say it loud and proud. I don't like HR. I think HR is one of the biggest challenges to get things done in an organization. Whether it be hiring, whether it be dismissing someone, HR always slows down the process of getting rid of someone who's not functioning in your team when you just need to cut the cord. And, when you're in an at will employment position, it's really easy to let someone go. But HR will make you keep someone on for another month, month and a half, just so that you can, and you're like, we're wasting time, company resources, money, projects are getting set back. Things are bad, and it's a bad precedent for other employees.
Well, yeah, I mean, one toxic employee can snowball pretty quickly, and what you end up having is you have one person that's not happy, and they start basically poisoning the rest of the team, and it snowballs, and then you end up having 5, 10 people leave at once just because of that one person just kind of started to slant everything a little bit. So yeah, no, I agree. The red tape is difficult, but you know that's why, again, just keeping a close eye on that culture is so important. If you can realize sooner rather than later that there's an issue, and that it's going to take X, Y, and Z amount of time to go through HR to get something done, the sooner you know about it, certainly the better. So that's why I think, regular employee performance reviews, that's a super key thing, at least quarterly performance reviews, and then have more informal sort of touch points. When I used to do HR and recruiting for the IT audit firm that I was with, I actually did regular touch points. I had to quarterly just check in with people. And that was actually a really powerful thing. I would learn pretty quickly if somebody wasn't happy, and I'd be able to kind of filter that and pass it on to the executives in a way that wouldn't frame that person poorly, but that would, give them an idea that maybe something needs to change. So I guess that's where HR can kind of be a good thing for you is,
Well,
serve as that person that talks to somebody that provides, that intermediary where you can learn about unhappiness or, any sort of toxicity that's brewing.
I think so. So I'll counter with this. I prefer to work with recruiters like you who spend a day in my organization and learn our culture and see how we run things and then go out and recruit people for us than have internal HR. That's my preference. Because I
Well,
feel
we're
like,
motivated
well,
because you pay us. So,
right.
you know,
Number one, yes, we pay you based on the good people that you bring on board. I think number two, um, you're once a recruiter. The difference between recruiter and HR people is the difference between sales and marketing. Marketing is theory, and that's HR, and sales is doing, and that's
I like
hands
that
on.
comparison. Yeah.
And recruiters are hands on, and marketing is HR, and HR equals marketing, whether it be internal marketing, external marketing, any way you name it, right? HR wants to put a standard. HR wants to protect the brand. And recruiters are like, I want to get you the best person to get this job done. And I want to get him to you as quickly as possible so that you don't have this void in your team anymore and that they fit your company. And I want them to last because that's how I get paid is if they last in your company. I don't want them to wash out.
Yeah, I guess it's results versus process orientation, really.
Right. And
I'm
not to say
I'm
you
kind
don't
of
need
both
both.
personally, but
Not to say you don't need both. Again, not to say you don't need both, but I am a firm believer that um, running good department heads and having good team leaders and letting your teams manage things and hire people based on what fits that team tends to be far more effective than kind of the forced fed process. And I'm telling you, I see that so much with people I speak with every single day, Pete. I mean, every single day I speak to people and they go, yeah, I'm at a dead end place. I've maxed out. And this whole, we were talking about earlier, this whole idea of people saying we're the best. Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? One thing that people don't understand about InfoSec is we're one large community. And at the end of the day, I can spend my morning on a phone call with security folks from Visa and then talk to other security folks from a different company, and they all support my organization. And so when someone good leaves me and goes to work for an organization that I do business with, I've just earned a really good security partner because I know the capabilities of that person.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest, I think in security, which is different from all other aspects, when someone good leaves me to go somewhere, I realize that's the company I'm probably going to want to do business with in 6 months if I don't do business with them right now.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly get almost sort of the inside scoop if, especially if you've spent the time and energy developing somebody as a professional and see them go elsewhere. Usually it's a pretty good indicator, especially if you have a positive culture where you're at, and they go leave to go somewhere else. It's like that place must be pretty awesome too. So,
Yeah. One tip I will tell for those listening who are employees who want to leave a place and think that sometimes ending on a good note is very difficult because you're part of a really good culture, you're part of a very good team, it feels like a family, and it almost feels like you're cheating on them. Don't feel that way. I think most people, yeah, some people may have a sour face because, they've been used to working with you for years and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I'd like to think that most people want to see someone who they work with do well. I believe in the good in humanity, right? So, um, yeah, it's difficult, but just have that conversation. I think it's one thing that I'll always tell people. When I hire them, I'm like, it's not about how you come on; it's about all how you leave.
that's a good way to put it. I talk to a lot of folks that, just like you said, they're afraid to leave because they've spent so much time and effort, especially if they're not the type to job hop. They put in their time, they're loyal. They, like you said, they feel almost kind of guilty, like they're cheating or something to go elsewhere. But at the end of the day, I think you got to do what's right for you and your career and your family.
Right.
If somebody approaches you with double the pay and excellent benefits, and it's exactly what you want to do, and maybe it's an opportunity to do something that you don't have in your current position, even though you like where you work, listen to it. I mean, it's not going to hurt you in any way. Never burn bridges, obviously. I always tell folks, make sure that you put in plenty of notice, even if you're not satisfied where you're at. And it is a toxic place to work. You just never know who you'll run across in, later stages of your career. So
I'd like to,
small world in security.
Yes, it's a small world in security, and people know people. And so you can go and talk to someone and interview for a job, and they end up knowing the person you worked for, and pick up the phone and call them and be like, hey, I interviewed, Brad. And they're like, Brad, oh yeah, he left us on really bad terms, barely gave notice, was slacking off his last week of work, showing up late, leaving early, all kinds of stuff. That reflects really bad. I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed who in the interview have shown me amazing sets of skills and like really good energy, and I felt like they'd be a good part of my team. And I know their previous manager, so I pick up the phone and call them, and I'm like, hey, unofficially, right? Let's have a off the docket conversation, off the record conversation. What'd you think of this person? Would you hire him again? What was he like? They'd be like, oh, technically he's great, magnificent, but you know what? That was our problem with them. And if you don't have fans in that company, like whenever someone comes and he says, for references of my old company, only use this one person, I question that so much, because I'm like, why that one person?
Yeah, well, and sometimes it could be, and I've seen this pretty often, where it's one person that's maybe the toxic member of the team, and they have one other person that's also a toxic member of the team, and everybody else is very positive, and so they have their little echo chamber, and that's maybe what their only reference is.
It feels like Twitter when I see that. And so, Pete, thanks so much for coming on the show. We've gone way over time, I think. We're like 7 minutes over time, but we're having a great conversation and sharing stories, and I hope people find this really, really...
Sound cut out. Still can't hear you.
Oh, how about now? There we go. I'm
Yep.
back. I got to change the wire on my mic today. So that'll be a good reminder. But I wanted to say, can people connect with you on LinkedIn? If I put the link here below in the description, bro.
Absolutely.
Pete's an amazing recruiter, folks, as you can tell. Very level-headed kind of guy, and the kind of people you want to work with. Just good, hard-working folk. And so... I like to highlight those people. So, Pete, thanks for coming on the show. Really do appreciate it. Now to you, our listeners, viewers, audience, all the great people. One, make sure you subscribe right now. Just do it right now, real quick. Just hit subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Turn on the notification bell. If you're listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, make sure to hit subscribe. November's dedicated to veterans. So the entire month of November, Sunday through Friday. I'm Jewish. I don't do anything on Saturday. I won't be posting content on Saturday. Want to encourage you to spend time with your families on Saturday, folks, like I do. We'll be posting every single day at 2 p.m. Eastern time, an episode highlighting and telling the story of different veterans that are in the InfoSec community. So if you want to take part of that, you can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or go to our website and fill out one of our Contact Us forms, and we'll touch base with you and get you on the show. We have very few spots left, folks. Like literally, I got to have like 26 episodes. We have 22 already booked. And several have already been pre-recorded and ready to go November 1st. So just make sure you tune in, plug in, honoring our veterans on this month of November. The entire month of November is all about honoring our veterans, giving them an entire month, which they absolutely deserve. So make sure you tune in and share and watch those episodes. You'll be seeing a lot more content in November. That's it for us here today at the CyberHub Podcast Tech Corner. Thank you for Pete so much for coming on the show. Thank you all for listening and watching. We'll be back with so much more next week. I've got a great guest next week from KnowBe4. Really good. And he's Dutch. So you know that he's going to be tall. And so with that being said, folks, we'll be back with more. Until then, stay healthy and stay cyber safe.